There is a hush in the auditorium, an expectant silence that seems almost alive, a gentle breath shared by all, as if the unconscious itself has gathered in this room, swirling about the feet of those who seek understanding. Let us begin, not as one who teaches, but as one who walks with you into the depths. For the psyche is not a distant land, but the very ground upon which you stand. Tonight, we embark upon a descent, not a descent into darkness as mere deprivation, but into the radiant, paradoxical heart of the shadow, that profound and inescapable companion who dwells behind your own eyes and, more hauntingly, wears the face of those you cannot abide. You may have arrived here seeking answers about your suffering, your aversion, your peculiar and inexplicable enmities, the people whose presence unsettles your spirit, whose very existence evokes in you a storm of discomfort, anger, even loathing. But I ask you, before we set forth, are you willing to see that which you have always denied? For the shadow is not an adversary to be slain, but a truth, long exiled to the margins of your waking mind, now returning, incarnated in the one you refuse to welcome into your heart. Let us not imagine the shadow as a mere metaphor for evil or an inventory of forbidden desires. It is far more subtle, far more insidious. The shadow is that living part of you which has never had the light of your love. It is a lost twin whose footsteps echo through your dreams, whose voice you mistake for the voice of a stranger. The shadow is not only what you hide, but also what you cannot bear to see in others, what you reject so fiercely in another that you create a personal hell for yourself, populated by enemies whose only crime is to mirror your own unclaimed self. To grasp this truth, one must be willing to abandon the comfortable lie that your consciousness is the sum total of your being. What you call I is but a frail raft adrift upon the ocean of the unconscious. From this vast sea rise not only your dreams and symbols, but also the figures who haunt you in waking life. The shadow is not only projected inwardly onto your nightmares and anxieties, but outwardly onto the faces of friends, lovers, rivals, and strangers. Every time you recoil from another, every time your heart hardens against someone for reasons you cannot fully explain, the shadow stirs. Imagine, if you will, the dreamer who finds herself pursued through an endless labyrinth by a dark figure. She runs desperately, the corridors shifting, the walls closing in. The figure is relentless, silent, and unyielding. At last, exhausted, the dreamer turns to confront her pursuer and sees her own face, twisted in anguish and longing. Such is the work of the shadow. It chases you until you can no longer flee, and then demands recognition, not annihilation. When you find yourself in the presence of the person you cannot stand, your psyche is presenting you with a living symbol, a vessel that carries a fragment of your own rejected soul. The heat of your reaction, the irrational intensity of your aversion is the signal the unconscious, unable to speak in words, resorts to the language of emotion, hatred, disgust, envy, These are the flares it sends up, warning you that what you see in the other is not alien, but profoundly intimate in your enemy. You meet yourself, though disguised in clothing you refuse to wear. Consider the archetype of the adversary, the eternal figure who appears in myth as the rival, the tempter, the betrayer. In the world of dreams, the shadow often takes the form of a brother, a sister, a parent, or aloes, for the unconscious is endlessly creative in its efforts to bring the lost parts of ourselves back into wholeness. Yet in waking life, this same energy is transferred onto real people who become unwittingly the custodians of our disowned qualities. This is not the product of malice, but of necessity. The psyche seeks balance, and that which is denied must find a way to return. In my own work, I have witnessed this drama play out in countless lives. The woman who despises the arrogance of her colleague, never recognizing the hunger for recognition she has buried beneath her own humility. The man who rails against the passivity of his partner, refusing to see his own fear of assertiveness. The devout soul who is scandalized by the sinner, blind to his own secret, longing for freedom from constraint. The world becomes a theater for the shadow to dance its silent ballet. And every encounter with the unbearable other is an invitation, a summons to the underworld of your own psyche. Do not imagine that this is a moral failing. The projection of the shadow is not a crime, but a consequence of being human. To live is to be incomplete, and to be incomplete is to suffer the return of what has been lost. The psyche seeks integration, not perfection. It is the work of a lifetime to recognize the shadow in yourself, and even longer to reclaim it. But the journey begins always with the other, with the living, breathing symbol who stands before you, carrying your darkness so that you may one day take it back. Perhaps you will protest, but surely some people are simply wicked, or toxic, or irredeemable. Of course, there are those who do real harm, and discernment is essential. But the shadow's operation is not a matter of excusing abuse or condoning evil. Rather, it is the deeper work of asking why this particular person evokes such power in you. Why does your soul vibrate with resistance in their presence? What old wound is being touched? What unacknowledged desire is being awakened? The shadow, after all, is not only made of darkness, but of unlived light. The gifts you envy, the strengths you dismiss, the possibilities you refuse, these too are fragments of your shadow, yearning for expression. This is the paradox of the human condition. What you reject in others is what you most fear or crave in yourself. The neighbor's ambition, the stranger's freedom, the friend's indifference all become intolerable, not because they are foreign, but because they resonate too closely with the notes you have silenced. The psyche, being whole, suffers in fragmentation. And so the world conspires to present you again and again with the faces you cannot bear until you realize that every encounter is a summons to the work of integration. If you wish to know yourself, do not look only inward into the comforting sanctuaries of your virtues and conscious ideals. Look outward into the eyes of those who disturb your peace, who unsettle your certainties, who shatter your self-image. In their presence, you will find the keys to your own transformation. The shadow, after all, is the gatekeeper to the soul's deepest treasures. It is the dragon who guards the gold, the dark forest that must be entered if the grail is to be found. Let us pause for a moment and consider the image of the mirror, a symbol as ancient as consciousness itself. In myth, to look into the mirror is to risk seeing not only one's beauty, but also one's deformity. Narcissus gazes into the pool and is destroyed, not by his love of self, but by his refusal to see the depths beneath the surface. The shadow is that which the mirror reveals, but the ego refuses to recognize. And so life arranges itself as a hall of mirrors, each person reflecting a different facet of your hidden being. The one you cannot stand is the one who holds the mirror closest to your wound. The work, then, is not to shatter the mirror or to curse the reflection, but to see with a new kind of vision. This vision does not come easily. It requires courage, the courage to admit that you are not whole, that you are haunted by the unlived life, that you are made of contradictions. It requires humility, the humility to confess that you are more than you appear, and that your greatest adversaries may be your greatest teachers. Above all, it requires love, affirce, unyielding love that is willing to embrace even the most unsavory parts of yourself. For only in that embrace does true transformation occur. It is no accident that the shadow appears at the threshold of every great journey. In myth, as in life, before the hero can claim the prize, before the initiate can pass into wisdom, the shadow must be faced, not conquered, not destroyed, but faced, looked upon with steady eyes and a willing heart. In the stories of old, the dragon is slain, not out of hatred, but as an act of union with the unknown. The grail is won not by purity, but by wholeness. The journey to selfhood is not a straight path, but a spiral descent into the labyrinths of the unconscious, where each turn brings you face to face with another aspect of your own shadow. In dreams, the shadow often appears as a figure of the same sex, an alter ego, a rival, a twin. It is the part of you that you have not lived, the life you have refused. For a man, the shadow is the undisciplined, emotional, or creative self he has denied in the name of strength or reason. For a woman, the shadow may be the ambitious, assertive, or wild aspect repressed for the sake of harmony. These figures haunt your dreams, disrupt your relationships, and sabotage your best intentions until you invite them to speak, until you recognize them as yourself. There is no shortcut to this work. It cannot be accomplished by willpower or by the recitation of noble intentions. The shadow must be experienced, not analyzed from a distance. It must be felt, suffered, and ultimately integrated. This is why the people who most disturb you are your greatest allies in the work of individuation. They force you to confront the limits of your own acceptance, the boundaries of your own self-knowledge. They carry, often unknowingly, the gold you have buried. I recall a patient, a man of great intellect and compassion, but who could not abide the foolishness of his neighbor. He raged against the man's impulsivity, his lack of discipline, his carefree laughter. It took many years for him to recognize that what he most despised was his own exiled spontaneity, his own forbidden joy. He had become a stranger to the child within, and so life sent him a living symbol, a reminder of what he had lost. Only when he could weep for the part of himself he had buried could he see his neighbor with new eyes, not as an enemy, but as a brother. The shadow is not a concept to be mastered, but a mystery to be lived. Every day offers you a new opportunity to see yourself in another, to welcome the stranger, to reclaim the lost parts of your own being. But be warned, the ego will resist this work with all its might. It will invent stories, mount defense, rationalize your aversion. It will do anything to avoid the shame, the grief, the fear that accompanies the encounter with the shadow. But beneath the terror lies a deeper promise, the promise of wholeness, of a life undivided. We are all haunted by the shadows we refuse to see. They gather in our relationships, our communities, our nations. Wars are fought, families are torn asunder, lives are wasted, not because of evil in the world, but because of the evil we refuse to see in ourselves. The shadow, unclaimed, becomes a collective demon. But if each of us were willing to look, to truly look into the eyes of the person we cannot stand, the world itself would begin to change. The work is personal, but its effects are universal. The peace you make with your own shadow is the peace you offer to the world. And so, as we draw this first breath of our descent together, I invite you to consider who is carrying your shadow, whose presence evokes in you the heat of rejection, the sting of envy, the bitterness of contempt. Can you see in their face the lineaments of your own unlived life? Can you welcome, even for a moment, the possibility that they are your greatest teacher, the gatekeeper at the threshold of your own transformation? Do not turn away. The journey has only just begun. The darkness you fear is not the absence of light, but the presence of a deeper wisdom, waiting to be claimed. In the next movement of our exploration, we shall go further, still into the labyrinths of dreams, symbols and archetypes, where the shadow waits with open arms, longing to be seen. The path into the shadow is not straight, nor can it ever be. We find ourselves wandering through corridors of memory, stumbling into dreams that are not merely nightly distractions, but encrypted messages from the unconscious, each one shimmering with the light of meaning just beyond our grasp. Let us linger here, in the space where the day's logic dissolves, and the language of symbol emerges to guide us deeper. You may have noticed in your own dreams figures that are at once familiar and terrifying. They pursue you, mock you, seduce or threaten you. Sometimes you yourself become the villain or the victim, slipping from one mask to another with a fluidity that the waking ego resists. Dreams are not interested in your comfort. They seek your growth. They arrange encounters with the shadow, not out of cruelty, but out of a longing for unity The shadow is the unlived life, the secret twin. You abandoned at the crossroads of childhood, when the demands of the world first pressed upon your soul. Do you recall a dream in which you stood accused? Or perhaps watched helplessly as someone you despised triumphed over you? Have you ever awoken in shame or confusion, unsure why you would betray yourself in the drama of the night? These are not accidents. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, constructs the dream as a stage upon which the exiled parts of you demand their lines. The person you cannot stand is so often the star of these unconscious dramas. The dream is a rehearsal for the soul's confrontation with what it has long denied. I remember a woman who came to me trembling as she described a recurring dream in which she was hounded by an arrogant woman, a figure who ridiculed her, exposed her vulnerabilities, and laughed at her attempts to hide. This woman, in her waking life, was gentle, accommodating, and self-effacing, so much so that her light often went unnoticed, and her voice was rarely heard. What did this persecutor in her dreams represent? We explored together, peeling back the layers of association, and found that the arrogant woman was not a demon, but a messenger. She embodied the assertiveness, the unapologetic self-expression that my patient had denied herself in order to remain acceptable, to remain loved. The shadow's cruelty was, in fact, the cruelty of deprivation, an inner voice saying, "This too is you. When will you allow me to live?" You see, the shadow is the ultimate shapeshifter. It borrows the faces of those who've wounded you, those you secretly envy, those you dare not become. In this way, life itself becomes your analyst. The world, through 1,000 irritations and insults, is forever asking, will you see yourself? Will you reclaim what you have disowned? It is as if the unconscious, tired of being ignored, sends its envoys into the streets, the boardrooms, the family gatherings, everywhere you go. The shadow is there, camouflaged as the very person you least wish to meet. This is not to say that every irritation, every wound is a product of your projection. There are real wounds inflicted by others, and it would be naive to suggest otherwise. But the psychological fact remains: the energy, the charge, the persistent fascination or revulsion you feel, these are clues not to be dismissed, but to be followed. The psyche is endlessly resourceful. It knows that growth cannot be forced, but must be lured out of hiding. The shadow does not want your destruction. It wants your attention, your courage, your willingness to dialogue with the unknown. The figures of the shadow do not dwell only in dreams. They walk beside you every day, in the people you attract, the conflicts you endure, the patterns you repeat against your will. Have you noticed how, despite your best intentions, you are drawn again and again to those who mirror your hidden wounds? The friend who betrays you in the very way you fear most, the partner who evokes your jealousy, your rage, your sense of inadequacy, the stranger whose laughter feels like mockery. even when directed elsewhere. The pattern is so precise, so repetitive, that one can hardly avoid the conclusion. There is a secret logic at work, a hidden architect arranging your encounters for the sake of your becoming, from the standpoint of analytical psychology. This is not accident, but necessity. The psyche demands wholeness. It is not content with your persona, the mask you present to the world. Your conscious ideals, your carefully curated virtues, beneath the persona, the shadow stirs, restless, hungry for inclusion. And when denied, it will make itself known through fate, through what appears to be chance, but is in fact the handwriting of the unconscious. Thus, the person you cannot stand enters your life at the appointed hour, bearing a gift disguised as a curse. To reject them is to reject yourself. To welcome them, even in imagination, is to begin the work of integration. But integration is not a simple process. It is not enough to think about your shadow, to analyze it as if it were a specimen pinned to the table. The shadow must be encountered, felt in the gut, acknowledged in the trembling of your hands, the quickening of your pulse, the eruption of old fears and sorrows. It is a physical experience, as much as a psychological one. When you feel that burning in your chest, that tightening of your jaw in the presence of the other, do not look away. Do not distract yourself with clever justifications or busy distractions. That discomfort is the first sign that you are alive, that you are standing at the very edge of your own becoming. In myth, this encounter is dramatized as a descent into the underworld, the hero's journey into the land of the dead, where old ghosts must be faced, bargains struck, treasures retrieved. No hero escapes this task. No soul can claim wholeness without first passing through the valley of its own shadow. In your life, this may appear as a crisis, a confrontation, a sudden loss, or the gradual erosion of your old certainties. You may find yourself in the company of those who test your patience, who offend your sensibilities, who force you to re-examine your story about who you are. This is not punishment. It is initiation. The figures who trouble you most are not random antagonists, but archetypes, eternal patterns of human experience, clothed for a moment in the flesh of those around you, the rival, the seducer, the betrayer, the fool. Each one carries a fragment of the totality you seek. The more violently you reject them, the more insistently they will return. The unconscious has no interest in your comfort, but is relentless in its pursuit of your wholeness. The task, then, is not to eradicate these figures, but to inquire, what have you come to teach me? What in me have I denied so thoroughly that you must carry it on my behalf? This is the paradox. That which you cannot stand in others is what you most need to reclaim in yourself. If you find yourself hating the arrogance of another, ask where you have been forbidden to assert yourself. If you are wounded by the indifference of a friend, ask where you have denied your own need for boundaries. If you are scandalized by another's freedom, ask where you have imprisoned your own spirit. The shadow is not the enemy of the good, but its hidden root without it. You are incomplete, a half person, haunted by what you refuse to see. The work of integration requires both humility and imagination. Humility to confess that you do not know yourself as well as you wish. Imagination to envision a larger self, one who can contain contradictions, who can hold darkness and light in a creative tension. It is not a matter of becoming perfect, but of becoming whole. This is why the path of individuation, the path toward your own unique selfhood, passes always through the gate of the shadow. There is no other way. Let me offer another image, that of the alchemist toiling in his hidden laboratory, striving to turn base metal into gold. The process is not only chemical, but spiritual. The base metal is the shadow, the raw material of your unlived life. The fire is your suffering, your longing, your refusal to settle for half-truths. The gold is the integrated self, a union of opposites, a soul at peace with its own complexity. The alchemist knows that transformation is not a single event, but a series of deaths and rebirths. Each time you encounter the person you cannot stand, a new stage of the work is initiated. Something old must die, an illusion, a defense, a cherished resentment, so that something new may be born. Perhaps you have felt the stirring of this alchemical process within yourself, a moment of clarity in which you see your enemy not as a monster, but as a mirror, a sudden softness in your heart when rage gives way to curiosity, and curiosity to compassion. These are precious moments. Do not dismiss them. They are signs that the unconscious has been heard, that the work is underway. The psyche responds to attention as a flower to sunlight. What you notice, you transform, but beware, the shadow is clever, endlessly adaptive. The ego, fearing dissolution, will attempt to maintain its boundaries at all costs. It will disguise the shadow in ever subtler forms, self-righteousness, victimhood, spiritual superiority. The work of integration is never finished. It is a spiral, a dance, a lifelong unfolding. Each time you think you have vanquished the shadow, it returns in a new guise, asking for recognition, for inclusion. Do not despair. This is the nature of the soul's journey, not to arrive, but to deepen. Let us return for a moment to the lived reality of your encounters. Tomorrow, you will find yourself once again face to face with the person you cannot stand. Perhaps it is a colleague, a relative, a lover, or a stranger on the street. In that moment, remember you are being offered a gift. The heat in your chest, the urge to recoil or retaliate is the unconscious knocking at the door. Pause, notice, ask yourself, what is being awakened in me? What part of myself is asking to be seen, to be lived, to be loved? The answer may not come immediately. The shadow does not yield its secrets to the impatient, but your willingness to ask, to look, to feel, this is the beginning of wisdom. Do not underestimate the difficulty of this work. To integrate the shadow is to risk everything you have believed about yourself. It is to question your innocence, your virtue, your place in the world. It is to confess that you, to are capable of darkness that you are made of, the very stuff you have most despised. But it is also to discover in that same darkness a wellspring of creativity, vitality, and love. The shadow is not only the repository of evil, but of everything you have not yet dared to become. As we move forward in this exploration, let us carry with us the humility of the beginner, the curiosity of the child, the courage of the hero. The person you cannot stand is not your enemy, but your guide. The world, in all its complexity and contradiction, is your mirror. In the dance of projection and recognition, you are being shaped into something larger than your conscious mind can conceive. This is the work of a lifetime, and it is never finished. But with each encounter, each moment of self-honesty, you move closer to the center of your own soul. The shadow waits for you there, not as a threat, but as a friend you have not yet learned to love. To remain in the labyrinth of the soul is to accept that you will sometimes lose your bearings, that the familiar signposts will disappear, and that you must feel your way by a sense that is deeper than reason, older than language. What compels us to move forward, to follow the thread deeper? Even as the darkness thickens and the air grows heavy with memories we would rather forget, it is the hunger for wholeness, a drive so persistent, so insistent, that it weaves itself into every conflict, every moment of pain, every fleeting glimpse of beauty that leaves us aching for more. There is a rhythm to this journey. The world provokes, the shadow rises, the ego resists, and yet something ancient in you leans forward. Compelled by an instinct you do not control, you find yourself again and again staring into the eyes of someone whose presence disrupts your equilibrium, whose gestures or words awaken in you the heat of judgment or the chill of shame. The temptation is always to look away, to retreat into explanations and justifications, to project the discomfort outward and transform it into certainty about the other's flaws. But beneath this reflex lies the invitation to see not as a judge, but as a witness to the soul's own drama, unfolding in real time. Consider the archetypal image of the doppelganger, the double who appears in dreams and stories as a harbinger of fate or misfortune. In the old tales, to meet one's double is to encounter the possibility of transformation or disaster. The double is the shadow made flesh, the echo of everything you might have been, everything you might yet become, walking towards you from the far end of the road. When you recoil from another person, when their existence seems to threaten your very sense of self, you are standing at the threshold where the double appears, holding out a mirror that is sharper and clearer than any you have known. I have often said that the greatest danger to the soul is not darkness, but unconsciousness. It is not what you suffer, but what you refuse to suffer, that chains you to your fate. The shadow does not punish you for your humanity. It punishes you for your refusal to claim your humanity in its fullness. And the world, in its silent wisdom, conspires with the unconscious to bring you face to face with the person who holds the key to your prison. Even if that key comes wrapped in rage, envy, or disgust, imagine for a moment that every encounter is orchestrated for your awakening, The people you admire are easy to embrace. They evoke in you the qualities you have accepted, the virtues you have claimed. But the people you cannot stand, the ones who trigger your defenses and set your nerves on edge, these are the shadow bearers. The ones who have been given the thankless task of reminding you of all that you have not yet loved. They do not come to harm you, though harm may result if you turn away from their message. They come as initiators, as sacred adversaries, as guides into the terrain that is most truly your own. This recognition does not absolve others of responsibility for their actions, nor does it deny the reality of pain or injustice. But it does ask you to consider, why does this particular person, at this particular time, hold such sway over your emotional weather? Why does your spirit tremble or harden in their presence? Why do you rehearse arguments with them in your mind again and again? Long after they have gone, the shadow, when projected, gains a life of its own. It haunts you, pursues you, until you turn and face it with the question that undoes the knot of projection. What is mine in this? The answer will rarely be obvious. It may come as a whisper, a half-remembered feeling from childhood, a sudden pang of guilt or longing. It may come as a pattern, an echo of earlier relationships, the repetition of wounds that never quite heal. The psyche is a master of disguise. It layers the truth in riddles, in stories, in symptoms that do not make sense to the rational mind. The shadow cannot be summoned or commanded, only invited. Its language is not that of reason, but of symbol, image, and feeling. Here, dreams are your greatest allies. They speak the truth. The ego cannot bear. They bring the shadow into focus. When waking life has blurred the outlines, I have heard the same dreams recounted in different tongues, across continents and cultures. The dream of being chased, of facing an accuser, of committing an act one would never dare in daylight. Each dream is a confession, a love letter from the parts of you waiting to be seen. The person you cannot stand in life often appears in your dreams, but transformed sometimes as a monster, sometimes as a guide, sometimes as a child abandoned at the roadside. The unconscious is not cruel. It seeks your healing, even if the path is through sorrow and confusion. Let me share with you the story of a man who was tormented by the weakness of others. He prided himself on his discipline, his order, his relentless pursuit of achievement, yet everywhere he turned, he found himself surrounded by people he perceived as lazy, disorganized, irresponsible. His irritation was unending. His sense of superiority bitter. Only when his life collapsed, when illness and loss stripped away the scaffolding of his persona, did he begin to see that the weakness he despised was a projection of his own denied vulnerability. He had cast out his need for rest, for gentleness, for surrender, and the world had obliged him by carrying these qualities in the people he could not forgive. It was only in the silence of convalescence that he could welcome the weak ones back into his heart, not as enemies, but as teachers. The shadow had done its work. The shadow is not only personal, but collective. Societies, like individuals, create shadows, whole groups of people who carry the disowned qualities of the dominant culture. The stranger, the foreigner, the heretic, the scapegoat, these figures absorb the collective projections of fear, envy, and aggression that the group cannot admit to itself. History is a graveyard of such projections, wars, persecutions, witch hunts, and pogroms, all rooted in the refusal to see the shadow in one's own tribe, one's own nation, one's own heart. The work of integration is not merely for the individual, but for the world until we can meet the person. The group, the nation, we cannot stand and ask, what is ours in this cycle of projection and violence will not end. The process of integration, of reclaiming the shadow, is not a single act, but a way of life. It is the willingness to live in the question, to be uncomfortable, to let the unknown speak. It is a discipline of attention, a radical honesty with oneself. When you notice the tightening in your chest, the flush of anger, the sting of jealousy, pause. Do not rush to explain, to blame, to act. Let the feeling wash over you. Let it speak its truth. What part of you is waking up? What have you denied for so long that it now demands to be heard? Even if only through the proxy of another. Sometimes the shadow returns, not in rage, but in longing. The person you envy, whose freedom or beauty or joy stirs resentment in your soul, they too are carrying your unlived life. The longing is as dangerous as the hatred, for it reveals your secret hunger, your refusal to claim the full spectrum of your own being. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim not only your darkness, but your light, to risk being large, creative, passionate, unruly, alive. The cost is great, but the reward is a life that is truly your own. You may wonder, how do I begin? The answer is both simple and impossible. You begin by noticing, by feeling, by refusing to turn away. You begin by making room for the discomfort, by allowing the person you cannot stand to be your teacher, your mirror, your initiator. You begin by listening to your dreams, by writing them down, by asking what they want from you. You begin by daring to imagine that you are more than you have ever believed, and that what you see in others, especially what you cannot bear to see, belongs to you in some mysterious and necessary way. As you move through life, you will find that the people you cannot stand change form, but the work remains the same. The shadow is relentless, but also merciful. It offers you chance after chance to come home to yourself, to make peace with your own contradictions, to become whole. The path is long, and there are no guarantees. But each step you take toward integration is a step away from fate and toward freedom. In this freedom, there is a new kind of love, a love that includes the unacceptable, the broken, the strange. You begin to see that the world is not divided into the good and the bad, the worthy and the unworthy, but is a tapestry of souls, each one struggling with their own shadow, each one carrying a piece of the mystery. Compassion grows in the soil of self-knowledge. Forgiveness becomes possible when you see your own face in the enemy, your own longing in the stranger. The journey is not linear, nor is it ever finished. There will be days of clarity and days of confusion, moments of peace and moments of despair. But in the end, you will find that the person you could not stand has become, in some strange alchemy, your companion, your teacher, your guide, and you, having faced your own shadow, will become a light in the darkness for others, a living invitation to wholeness. Let us pause here in this sacred space between the known and the unknown. The shadow waits for you, not with threats, but with gifts, gifts you have long denied, but which are yours by birthright. The world, with all its provocation and pain, is your crucible. Will you accept its invitation? Will you let the person you cannot stand show you the way home? There is a moment, as night yields imperceptibly to dawn, when the world is neither shadow nor light, but a living tension of both, an hour when the old certainties dissolve and all things seem possible. In the landscape of the soul, this is the hour of awakening, when what was feared is seen as kin, and what was rejected is invited home. Our long descent has brought us to this threshold, to the place where you may begin to sense the contours of a greater self emerging, a presence both ancient and new, shaped from everything you have loved and everything you have despised. Here, the figures who once haunted you stand in a different light. The person you could not stand is no longer a warden at the gates of your suffering, but a messenger bearing the secret of your own becoming. I do not wish to deceive you into believing that the work is done when you reach this point. The soul is a spiral, and the shadow returns, ever deeper, ever subtler. But something has shifted, if only your willingness to look, to feel, to inquire. The world itself, it seems, becomes less threatening when you recognize it as a mirror. Even suffering acquires meaning as every wound becomes the seed of understanding, every adversary a page in the book of your own unfolding story. Let us pause here and listen. For the voice of the shadow is now less a cry and more a whisper, an invitation rather than a threat. Can you sense the peace that hovers at the edge of your awareness? The possibility that you might live not in fear of your contradictions, but in service to a wholeness greater than your own plans. This is not a peace of sleep, nor the safety of perfection, but a dynamic equilibrium. The living unity of darkness and light within a soul that dares to become itself. I have spoken often of symbols, for they are the true language of the unconscious. The shadow itself is a living symbol, carrying the mystery of what you have not yet embraced. When you dream, or when life confronts you with the unbearable qualities of another, pay attention to the images that arise. Is it a beast, a stranger, a child, an outcast, a lover spurned? Each image is a cipher, a code that if dwelt upon, if honored, will yield its meaning. Write these images, reflect upon them, paint them if you are so moved. In this act of creative encounter, the boundary between me and not me softens. You become, for a moment, both artist and artwork, both knower and known. You may find, as you continue this work, that forgiveness comes more easily, not as a duty, but as a recognition that there is nothing in another that does not also live in you. The person you cannot stand loses their power to wound, for you have withdrawn your projections and reclaimed your own complexity. There will still be disagreements, boundaries, necessary separations, but the bitterness, the compulsive need to vilify, begins to dissolve. Compassion is born not from sentimentality, but from the hard-won knowledge that every soul is wrestling with a shadow, and every shadow is seeking its place in the sun. The practical path forward is neither formulaic nor prescriptive, for the unconscious recoils from instructions delivered as commandments. Instead, I invite you to cultivate a practice of inner dialogue, of sustained curiosity, of gentle confrontation. When you next find yourself in the presence of someone who provokes you, do not rush to silence the feeling or change the subject. Turn inward. Feel the reaction in your body, the story that arises in your mind, the memory it awakens. Ask yourself, what in me is being touched not with accusation, but with honest wonder? If a dream brings you into contact with your shadow, perhaps through conflict, shame, seduction, or terror, write it down. Sit with the images, not as a judge, but as a guest in a foreign land. Let the dream speak, and resist the urge to interpret too quickly. Sometimes the meaning arrives as a feeling, a shift in the air, a new tenderness towards yourself, or another. Sometimes it requires time, days, weeks, or even years before its message becomes clear. Trust the process. The soul has its own tempo, and wisdom emerges in its own season. In waking life, notice the patterns that repeat, the relationships that end in similar pain, the arguments that cycle without resolution, the themes that haunt your art or your private fantasies. These are not failures, but clues. The psyche is dogged in its devotion to your healing. It will arrange your circumstances so that the shadow, again and again, has a chance to be welcomed home. There is a creative energy in the shadow waiting to be liberated. The very traits you most despise may conceal gifts. You need courage disguised as arrogance, freedom masked as irresponsibility, tenderness camouflaged by sentimentality, or power hidden within what you call weakness. The work is to discern the gold within the lead, to refuse the easy temptation of dismissal or contempt. Ask yourself, when faced with the intolerable in another, what beauty, what strength, what possibility is here, twisted out of recognition by fear or repression? Let yourself imagine a larger life in which even these forbidden energies find expression transformed, not innate. Some will ask, but what of evil? What of true malice? Evil is real, and it cannot be dismissed by mere psychological explanation. There are those whose actions destroy and violate. To see your shadow in another does not mean to excuse what is inexcusable, nor to remain in harm's way. Boundaries are essential, but even here, the deeper work persists to ask, what in me is drawn to this pattern? What lessons, what warnings, what buried wounds are being revealed? The shadow teaches sometimes by what it draws you toward, sometimes by what it commands you to refuse. It is easy to romanticize the shadow, to imagine that its integration will bring only ease and transcendence. But the truth is more challenging and more wondrous. The process will shake your certainties, call your virtues into question, and reveal the vastness of what you do not know. You will meet sorrow, anger, grief, longing, and if you persist, a joy that is not based on superiority or safety, but on the unshakable foundation of having faced yourself and survived. The work of the shadow is ultimately a work of love, the slow, patient, often painful labor of becoming whole. This is not a solitary task. Every relationship is a crucible, every encounter a test. Sometimes the greatest progress is made in a single conversation, a moment of humility, a glance across a crowded room that says, I see you, I see myself in you. Other times, the work is hidden, subterranean, moving in silence for years before a single insight brings the dawn. Let me close this journey with an invitation, not a prescription. As you leave this hall, as you return to your life, its joys, its burdens, its tangled web of relationships, carry with you the knowledge that the world is alive with mirrors, and that each reflection, however distorted or painful, is an opportunity for growth. When you meet the person you cannot stand, pause, feel the discomfort, welcome it as a guide, turn your gaze inward, and let the question linger, what is my shadow asking of me in this moment? What have I yet to love in myself, that I might at last love the world? Let this inquiry become your quiet companion. Write your dreams, paint your fears, dare to imagine that nothing human is foreign to you. If you are brave, share your discoveries, not as confessions to be judged, but as gifts to the human community, as signs that you too have walked through the valley of the shadow and emerged, changed. And if in your moments of solitude you feel lost or afraid, remember the soul is a labyrinth, and to be lost is sometimes the surest way to find yourself. Trust the process, trust the wisdom of your symptoms, the persistence of your dreams, the teachings of the person you cannot stand. The shadow is not the enemy, but the herald of your own wholeness. Welcome it, not with resignation, but with curiosity, with courage, and at last with love. Go now into your life, not as one who has mastered the darkness, but as one who befriends it again and again. For as long as you draw breath, the journey is never finished. But every step taken in honesty is a step toward the center, where your true self waits patient, whole, and unafraid